Hello and welcome. So today we're going to be looking at a different form of market failure. So we've had a look at markets, we've had a look at market structures, the way that markets operate when they don't have any government intervention in them and what can happen. And today we're looking at another way that markets can fail. So we know a little bit about missing markets, we know kind of like what can happen when there isn't a profit motive and how there are certain essential markets to us that can end up not existing. But we're looking today at different externalities. I'm going to split this video into two. We're going to look at positive and we're going to look at negative externalities. But externalities in general are just effects of a private transaction on a third party. So that might seem like a little bit weird, or what does that mean, or what does that what effect is that, or like where does that lie in everyday life? But it's just basically, if I have a private transaction, if I purchase a good, what is the effect on somebody who is outside of that transaction? So a stranger, a friend, somebody who isn't a part of me or the firm. We know that markets operate between a firm and a consumer, so private transaction, but often enough, those private transactions can have effects on people outside, or environments or animals or ecosystems outside of the private transaction. And those are externalities. So externalities, the existence of externalities is an example of market failure. It basically means that the market is not operating in the best position for society, socially efficient if you like. So there are positive and negative externalities. We're going to look at positive today, and our next video will be looking at negative. Now, the biggest thing that I find that students struggle to get their head around is the idea that all externalities are bad, right? So even though it's the word positive, it's not a good thing. It indicates there is a market failure, even though there is a positive externality in the market. And we're going to have a look at why that happens right now. So positive externalities are just positive effects to a third party. So positive effect to a third party outside of the transaction. And what that means is that basically there is a positive effect to somebody who is outside of the transaction. So for instance, I'm getting my master's, I'm paying for my master's degree, and there are positive effects to those outside. The transaction of me and my master's between me and my university. But actually, it's good for my students, it's good for society, for me to be better educated, and therefore well, at least I hope so, otherwise that's a waste of £13,000. But there is a positive effect for all of you guys of me getting that level of education. You have nothing to do with the private transaction, you did not pay for it, and therefore there is a positive externality. So, the existence of positive externalities means society should consume more. If people are benefiting from so much from me having a master's degree as a teacher, well then maybe more teachers should be able to have access to master's degrees, or more individuals in society should have access to better education if there are positive externalities of them. It indicates that we are not consuming enough of that good in the private transaction. There is a positive externality. We should consume more. So the idea of a positive externality indicates that there is underconsumption of a good. So that is a bad thing. Underconsumption is a bad thing. There are lots of things that we should consume more of. So what I'd like you to do is think about, in your head, different examples of goods that might have positive externalities that you can think of. So one of the ones that comes to mind straight away is eating healthily, exercise, going to museums, education. All of those things have positive externalities. So for instance, if I buy lots of fruit and vegetables, that makes me much healthier, means that I take less days off sick, it means that I'm more present for my family. All of those things, therefore it has a positive externality. Therefore, I should do more of it. Other people should consume more of it. There is an underconsumption. We should do more. That's a bad thing. The same with exercise, the same with education, the same with visiting museums, which is under the umbrella of education as well. So you should be familiar, or at least have an idea about the diagram so far, but we're going to have a look and break that diagram down kind of step by step. So in our diagram here, the one thing that we're definitely going to have in our axes is it's not cost and benefit. It's not necessarily about price, though this is equally kind of similar to price. Because we're doing EdExcel, you only need to know about consumption benefits, externalities. You don't necessarily need to know about production externalities. So when you're doing revision, if you're looking at other websites, if you're looking at kind of stuff online, be really careful because you only need to know about the consumption ones. So the biggest thing that you're going to struggle with here, I think anyway, is the idea of a line talking about the marginal private benefit, the marginal social benefit, the marginal private benefit, the marginal private cost, and the marginal social cost. So when we talk about marginal, what does that mean? Well, marginal means the additional unit. So for instance, if I ate one piece of fruit a day, my marginal would be to 0 to 1. If the next day I ate 2 pieces of fruit, the marginal would be 1. Even though I've eaten 2 pieces of fruit, the marginal would also be 1 because it's the additional from my previous day, which was 1. If I had the next day I ate 4, well then my marginal would be 2, even though I've consumed 4, because obviously the day before I ate 2. So we're talking about the marginal benefit. So I think the best thing here to think about is kind of like education, for instance. It's a really easy one for all of us to be able to see, has a really strong positive externality. So the marginal private benefit is what we're going to talk about first. So the marginal private benefit, what do you think that line looks like on this diagram? I want you to pause, draw these axes, have a go at drawing that first initial line, then we're going to do it together. So the marginal private benefit is downwards sloping. Now that might seem slightly counterintuitive for you, right? And it might seem slightly counterintuitive for you because you think, well, the more vegetables you eat, the better. The more education you have, the better. Absolutely, that is completely true. But the marginal benefit from each additional unit of consumption is falling, but it is still positive. If it's still positive, your marginal benefit is still positive, then your overall benefit is still rising, but it's just rising at a slower rate. Right? So therefore our marginal private benefit is downward sloping. If it was just our private benefit, then it would be upward sloping at a slower rate. However, it is downward sloping when we look at the marginal. So, and the way to think about that is quite simple. Like, the most important thing that you will ever learn is to read and write, and everything from then has a positive impact of your life, but definitely learning to read and write is the most important step in any form of education. Like, without that, there's literally very little that you're going to be able to do moving forward. So that first one is like, there is an increasing benefit from then on in, but that is the most important thing that you're going to learn. So, when we think about the marginal social benefit of education, we'll think about it. Who benefits? Does society benefit more than the individual from being educated? Yes, absolutely. There are huge effects for society when it comes to education. You'll learn all about them in macro, so I'm not going to waste loads of your time doing it now, but it's kind of universal across economics and most of the subjects, all of the subjects. That education is incredibly good for the whole of society. So if everybody is educated, then the whole of society benefits far more than just the individual, right? If you think about the cumulative benefit of me having a degree, me having a master's, all your teachers having degrees, all of your teachers knowing their subjects in and out, you have benefited more and more and more from that. So at the same quantity as we move along, the marginal social benefit is higher. So, and it may well be increasing or it may well be diminishing. It's unimportant necessarily. I think as long as you don't have it looking like this, so the marginal social benefit is being reduced at the marginal social benefit is increasing but at a slower rate than the marginal private benefit, that's fine. It's either the same rate where you can have them parallel or at a higher rate, right? So you could either have this parallel, or what you actually most often see is it looks like this. Here is your marginal social benefit. Now, for the sake of this, we kind of we said the marginal private cost and the marginal social cost are equal to each other, and obviously the marginal cost of education is rising. Now, the cost of anything is not literally just what you physically pay, right? So it's not just what you might pay in a private transaction. If you think about education, for instance, the cost of you acquiring education and the cost of society acquiring education is not just the physical amount that it costs you to pay for that education. It's also the time that you spend, like the hours that you put in, the resources that you use towards it. And obviously the resources that you use towards it are not just financial. If you are educating yourself right now, watching this video, there is an opportunity cost of your time, right? So that is a cost. Even though education may well be free for you at the moment, you are still spending your time completing that education, and therefore that is a cost. So it's so important for you to think about that when we're talking and starting to look more at manipulating this diagram. So that is upward sloping. The more you kind of consume, the more expensive it becomes, the more time you have to give to it, kind of the more resources you have to divert to it, and therefore it is an upward sloping curve here. So, and like I said before, we say that the marginal social cost is equal to the marginal private cost here. So what I want you to do now is think about, where does the market operate? And I don't want you to just tell me where it operates, I want you to tell me why it operates there as well. So the market is going to operate where the marginal private benefit is equal to the marginal private cost, right? So that is here. Why is it going to operate there? Well, why would you, because we don't have perfect information, you don't know how much your education is benefiting everybody else around you. The only thing that you are aware of is how much it educates and how much that education benefits you. So you are not going to educate yourself beyond the point where it is costing you more than it is benefiting you, right? So if you're not getting as much out of it as you're putting into it, then you're very unlikely, you just won't spend your time, your resources diverted to that education. Like, you won't do it. So you will consume as much as the benefit of your cost of your time and your resources that you're spending it to. And therefore, the quantity that is consumed in the market is where the marginal private benefit is equal to the marginal private cost. And that is here. And you can put that line across there. But at that amount there, the society, your community, whatever, is benefiting far more from your education than just you are. And we can see here that at this quantity, society is benefiting this amount. So the benefit to society is much higher than the private benefit at the amount that you are consuming. So if you had perfect information, if you knew exactly how much it was benefiting, if there was a completely fair and even society where we were socially efficient, where do you think we would operate? Well, we would operate where the marginal private cost is equal to the marginal social benefit, which is here. And as we can see, the quantity that we would consume if we were socially efficient, if we had kind of complete perfect information in the market, is much higher, right? The quantity is much more. And we would not consume beyond a point where society is benefiting more than it is costing us, right? So in the same kind of vein as previously, you would not consume more than it is benefiting society. If the cost to you, if your resources that you were diverting to it, you were putting more in than anybody was getting out of it, then it would be pointless for you to continue doing that, and it would be pointless for society for you to continue to do that. Not pointless, but like, it would be a waste of your resources, potentially. So, as you can see here, we have a difference in the quantity that is actually consumed and the quantity that should consume if we think about society and what is best for everybody as a whole. So, what is happening on this diagram? Well, we have a welfare lost to society, and that is this triangle here. So from this point here, point A to point B, so point B is equal to where the private market runs, so that's the private market equilibrium. Point A is the benefit to society at the private market equilibrium, and then point C here is where the equilibrium would be if we had a social equilibrium, right? So it's the socially optimum amount of consumption in the market. So that forms a triangle, and that triangle is known as our welfare lost. Now, what's really important here for you to understand that it is the welfare lost, but it is the welfare lost from underconsumption, right? So it's the welfare lost from underconsumption. So we are not consuming enough. So we are not consuming enough in the market, and therefore we have a welfare loss, which is this diagram, this triangle ABC. Now, here's a trick for you, from me to you. If you are in the exam and you're drawing this diagram, you might get confused between negative externality and positive externality. That is absolutely fine. Here is a way to check your diagram to make sure that you've done it properly. You may well shade in this section in here. That's absolutely fine. Here is my trick to you to make sure that you get it right. So your triangle here will make a more than sign, right? So we can see there is a triangle that's pointing that way. That is a more than sign. That indicates that the society should consume more than they currently are, which would indicate that you've drawn a positive externality. So that is my little trick to you when you're in the exam. Just check here, if you've shaded in this area here, it makes a less than sign, you're trying to do a positive externality, therefore you know that your correct diagram will make a more than sign. So hopefully that will be useful for you under time conditions. So the one thing that I want you to know is that this diagram is incredibly important. It's really useful, and it's a super useful tool that so many different economists use. So the exam board will expect you to be able to draw this diagram. Not only will they be expecting you to draw this diagram, but they will also be expecting you potentially to manipulate this diagram to show the effect of government intervention into the market. So you should be able to manipulate this diagram, and we're going to have a go at doing that right now very quickly together, and then I've got some ones for you to do it on your own. So the one I want us to have a look at is healthy eating. So what might kind of the government intervention into the market for healthy eating? So what have we seen as government intervention for healthy eating? Think about it for a minute. So one of the things that definitely comes to my mind is the little blob family, where it's like the active, healthy blob family that you used to have an advertising campaign for. So we can see that the government has put in a lot of money into an advertising campaign to get people to eat more. So the first step in manipulating this diagram is to think to yourself, which area is it going to affect? Does it affect the marginal social or private cost? Does it affect the social benefit? Or does it affect the marginal private benefit? Pause the video and have a think as to which one of those does it affect. So, if you are eating more healthily, if you are suddenly aware, you've got better information, because that's essentially what an advertising campaign is, it's an information campaign. If you have better information on eating healthily, you know that it's better for you, and you do it more, therefore your marginal private benefit is what has been targeted. So the marginal private benefit has been affected. And what has happened to the marginal private benefit? Well, the marginal private benefit of consumption has increased, right? You are consuming more, and you also know how much better it is for you, so your marginal private benefit of consumption has increased. So we can say that there has been an increase in the marginal private benefit. Now, if it was a perfect advertising campaign, if it worked perfectly, then it would completely get rid of the externality, and we would see that this line would shift up here, and actually the marginal social benefit would be equal to the marginal private benefit, and there would be no externality at all. However, that is not entirely realistic, and what actually happens is we increase and we eat more, but we don't eat as much as we should. So what we see is an increase here, and it should be a parallel shift, but easy when you've got a ruler, not so easy when you do it on camera. So we have a parallel shift in our marginal private benefit plus advertising, right? Our healthy eating advertising campaign. And we can see what's happened here. We've had an increase in our quantity with our advertising campaign. We can see that we now have this, and our externality has gotten smaller. So the government intervention into the market has decreased the externality, and if it was perfect intervention, then it would shift all the way over here, and it would decrease and get rid of the positive externality, and we would be consuming the correct amount. So there would be no market failure. Or government intervention, a better way to put it would be that government intervention has corrected the market failure. So the final thing that I've got for you to do here is just 3 for you to have a go at on your own. Now the answers to this one are going to be on my Instagram, just Martinomics on Instagram, and you will see the kind of diagrams that have moved the correct line for these 3. So what I've done here is there's 3 different ones. So there's education subsidy for university and education subsidies for primary education. Both of these are in the UK because primary education is completely free in the UK, and university subsidy is slightly different. So before you do it, do have a look at the difference between those 2 things so you know that they affect this kind of slightly differently. Not much differently, but slightly differently. And then we've also got museum advertising, so advertising campaigns to get people to go to museums more. So the answers to these 3 are going to be available on my Instagram. I hope that this has been useful for you, and I look forward to seeing you for negative externalities next. Bye!